Welcome back to the Blue Sky Performance YouTube channel. I'm Jesse, and today I'm going to show you how to make a good paint job a great paint job. All right, so first things first, we're going to want a nice clean surface. A bunch of work has been done to the car after paint that made the car get a little bit dirty. I always paint my cars first, and then I do the undersides. That way, if any stuff overspray gets on the paint, I'm not getting anything on the finished product. I'm getting it on a clear coat that's going to be cut and buffed, sanded, to oblivion, so that it doesn't matter. It doesn't really affect my final finish. Obviously, you don't want to put any scratches in it, but you at least don't have to worry about overspray getting on a wet sanded and buffed perfect, don't want to touch it finish. So we'll go ahead and we'll just use a little detail spray just to get any of these, any of this dust off. Like I had mentioned, you don't want to scratch it, so you want to use a product that's gonna lift and remove any contaminants that's on the surface. So, tape residue, fingerprints, dirt, dust, stuff here and there. So we'll go ahead and we'll just give it a quick clean off, because we don't want to leave any materials, any substrates that might affect the finish on it when we start sanding it, because we want to use the sandpaper and only the sandpaper to scratch and sand down the paint, the clear coat. There are 6 fat coats of clear on this. When you bring a car to the next level, you're going to break every single rule in the book when it comes to paint. Your paint rep is going to lose some sleep, because they want to see, in a collision aspect, you put 2 coats of clear down on something, you got good UV protection, however you don't have the thickness. If we were to try to do this with any less than 6 coats, the possibility of breaking through to the base coat primer is way high. So you got to have that mill thickness so that we can sand it all down and make sure that it's, not going to break through, because that is a big expensive mistake. So first things first, you want to set up your workstation. You want a nice clean area, because again, just like wiping down the body, you don't want anything that's on your table that might be metal dust, dust in general, sawdust, depending on what you're doing in the shop. So I put a nice new fresh layer of masking paper down. It's quick, it's easy, and it locks down anything that might, you pick up a piece of paper and you get a piece of metal stuck on you, and then it winds up in your paint. So first things first, nice clean surface. I have all of our grits set up here. We have it's actually a 6-stage sanding system, starting with 600. Years ago, I would never go past 1,000. However, going to 8 or a 600 grit scratch for your initial cut, it's night and day. I found a huge difference in my final product when making the leap and going to an 8 or a 600 grit. This car, being that it had 6 coats of clear thrown down on it, we're going to go to 600. If you had only 5 coats of clear, I'd probably start with 8. However, we're going to start with 6. And that's basically your cut. That's the most crucial cut, is the initial cut. We use acrylic blocks to wet sand our clear coats. We also use these blocks to wet sand primer, because getting your substrate that you're going over it's paramount to get it as flat as possible. So these are from True Blocks. They are no longer made. Tyler went on to bigger, better things, but I've been fortunate enough to buy a couple sets of these True Blocks. They're acrylic. If you want to come in here, you can see they're, it's not just a piece of acrylic cut. He actually sanded them, got rid of the hard edge, so it does have a slight bit of a rolled edge, and they're all on different thicknesses. So you have a very thin, I should say, one for, this is good for, if you're going to be coming onto a surface like this, or if you have a car that is very round, 30s cars, 40s cars, something that's very round, you're going to want a flexible block, because what you don't want to be doing is, on your initial cut, you don't want to be using, for instance, I wouldn't sand this like this, because what you're going to do, you're going to decrease the surface area that your sandpaper is hitting. You want to use as much surface area as you can. So you use the appropriate block with the appropriate flexibility for the certain car that you're working for. We also have a tube out of just regular old PVC pipe. That's for getting in concave areas. Concave areas are the most difficult, at least I have found, the most difficult piece to sand. So, and then sometimes it's not always great, but sometimes your palm will work in some instances, but in general, an acrylic block is going to step up your game tenfold. So once we're done with our 600 grit scratch, we've leveled the paint. The paint has been completely sanded. Every square inch of the panel is sanded. And well, then our goal of each finer grit sandpaper is to remove the last grit scratch. So once we're done with 600 grit, it's going to look like it's ready for paint, but it's not. We're ready for the next step. So we will get some Mirka powder dry guide coat. We don't really use any aerosol guide coats here. We use dry, and the white guide coat is great for a dark color like this. Otherwise, you just go snow blind and you don't really know what you're sanding. You just think you're sanding, and then you have to make steps back. So, for instance, okay, great, I'm done with 600, and now I'm going to 1,000. What I think I just sanded the whole thing in 1,000. I'll then go to 1,500, then to 2, and I'll go all the way up. And then I'll start polishing, and I'll find that 1 or 2, 3, 4 rogue sand scratches that have been left. So this has allowed us to really step up our game. You'll see later in the video where the whole car basically turns white, because we want to run this into those 600 grit scratches so that when we move up, we know we're sanding all those. So 600, 1,000, it's a pretty big jump. However, you can remove the 600 grit scratch with 1,000, and then 15, 2,000, 2,500. 2,500 is going to remove the, there's a graining that is sometimes hard to buff out, so the 2,500 will remove that. And then when we're all done with, our acrylic blocks, we'll actually step up to a rigid foam block around the 1,500 grit scratch, and then 2,500 will actually be done with just your regular old soft block. And then finally, a Trizact 3000 will go over it. You can go to 5, they are available. You can even go to up to 8,000. However, we have not seen any major differences in the performance of a polish. So follow along. This is probably what most people dread. I love doing it. I don't get to do it too much, being that I am the owner of Blue Sky Performance, co-owner with Jeff. It's a very time-consuming process. It takes a lot of patience. So one of my favorite tools that I use are these Bluetooth headphones. Throw a podcast on, throw music on, whatever. I've always said that when you put a set of headphones in your ears and you get into it, it's almost like it makes the sandpaper work better. So it allows you to drown out everything and just focus on what you're doing. I have horrible ADD, so it keeps me in line. So yeah, so follow along and I'll start getting sanded. So here I've chosen it's roughly about 1/8 of an inch thick, semi-rigid block, has a little bit of bend to it. This quarter panel has a little bit of a crown to it, so this block will conform slightly to the crown of the quarter panel, because again, like I had mentioned, we're going to want to get as much surface area out of the sandpaper as possible. That will get the sandpaper working as efficiently as possible, and will also reduce the chances of putting choppiness in it, because if you have too rigid of a piece of sandpaper, you're only going to be sanding a small amount. And what you want to do is basically take all those highs and lows of the orange peel and just cut them off. Think of this step as your machining process. You're going to want it as machine straight as possible. So we're just going to go ahead, wet our panel down real good. I'll use 2 hands on the block too, because we want to be as precise as possible on this step. So we're slowly going ahead and we're just sanding at, say, you know, you're not going to want to go too far forward because your pass is your pass is only going to be about this wide. So if you go up and down, you're actually getting more out of the sanding block. We're also going to make sure that we're not taking our sanding block and rolling over the edge, because that will get you into a situation where you're going to cut through that edge, you're going to blow through, and guess what? You're going to get back in the booth. You're going to have to reprep it, repaint it. You're going to add more coats of clear coat, which increases your mill thickness. It can also, the more coats of clear coat you put on a panel can actually change the color. It's more prominent on silvers, whites, yellows. Darker green like this, you'll be okay, but I don't want to waste money or time, because if I have to go in and fix a breakthrough, it's on my dime. I can charge for the first round of paint. I can't charge for the second round of paint. So you're just going to be very, very careful about coming up to edges. I'm basically, in my mind, I'm telling myself this is a continuing panel. This isn't a 90 degree right here. This is a continuing panel, so that I'm taking the block, even though my block is going off the edge, we're not off the edge and rocking over. So we're just keeping it nice and flat. Here's my initial cut. This was a quick cut. You can kind of see during the initial cut where some imperfections will come up. For instance, here's a dirt nib, and you can see some leftover orange peel. If I were to step up to the next grit, 1000 grit, you would see all these areas are not cut down to the bottom of the texture. So this is still texture that's in the panel. And what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to take, what I do at least, is I take a silver Sharpie, and I'll take a silver Sharpie and I'll just mark where my low spots are. Because if you were to go back and sand these spots, you wouldn't be able to see where these spots were, because the water makes everything shiny again. So you get kind of what I call snow blind. So I'll go ahead and mark all these with appears to be a dead silver Sharpie. And you can see up here, this is an area that I had thought I had sanded well, but I hadn't. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to mark all these areas, and notice how I only stuck to a small area. I'm not going to do the whole panel. It can get a little overwhelming, so if you keep it into small sections at a time, focus on one section, check it off the list, and move ahead. Oh, here comes a complex, not an issue, just a typical problem. So when you're painting a car, paint tends to build up on an edge. So you can kind of see. So if you look at the reflection, it kind of goes up and down. The reason it's going up and down is because there's a whole lot of clear coat built up on this edge. And it actually even waterfalled down a little bit and caused a little bit of a run. So what we're going to do is I've noticed that there's a run. So what I'm going to do from the get-go is I'm just going to color the whole thing with a silver Sharpie. And that's going to act as a guide when I start sanding it. Because all I want to do, I want to sand away this high spot. This is all a high spot along here. So we're going to sand away here. I also, after we painted the underside, I came in and I flat cleared the door jambs here. And after painting the flat clear, there's a little bit of an edge, and us painters, we don't like hard edges. We want nice soft edges wherever possible. So doing the flat clear before cut and buff, after final paint, we're gonna wrap that flat clear just a little bit over the edge, so that during the wet sand and buff process, we're gonna remove that edge. So there's gonna be an invisible, nothing you can hook a fingernail onto. There's gonna be an invisible transition from the gloss to the flat. We also did this around here. This car used to be a convertible, and we have completely removed all that. So we fabricated this extension in, and we're going to be doing a dark gray. Let me start over. It's towards the end of the day, so I'm getting a little tired. It's going to have dark green and leather. So we're going to want to get rid of this little edge, since there's no actual break in the panel. We'll want to get rid of this edge and have a really nice transition from the gloss down into the flat, and the flat will meet the dark green leather really nicely. Now that the quarter panel's done, I'm going to work my way up to trunk filler panel, Dutchman panel, whatever you call it. We fabricated, like I had mentioned, we fabricated this closeout. Normally this opening comes to about here. We extended it because we deleted the convertible top and made this car a full roadster. Doesn't have any side glass or anything like that. And with this rollover, I wanted to start to introduce a flatter sheen for the leather, to match the leather. So we masked it off and flat cleared this flange. However, I don't want to have, like I had mentioned, I don't want to have any hard, fingernail edges. So what we're going to do is we're going to mask off the flat so that it stays protected throughout the sanding and buffing process. And we're going to mask it just inside of the flat clear area, so that when we go to sand, we can sand up to the tape, sand off that edge from 600 all the way to 2500, and then we'll remove the tape, move the tape a little bit further down, and then polish, compound polish, glaze it, and it'll be done. And the finished product will be a completely invisible transition. You won't be able to feel it, nothing. So it'll look really good. It's time consuming, however, the final product is something really special. So it's all masked up. I have about little under 1/8 of an inch of flat exposure, flat clear exposure. Just enough that if, for the instance that the sandpaper rolls over, I'm not going to mar the flat clear finish, because if you scratch a flat clear finish, there's no going back. You can't polish it, you can't touch it up, you can't do anything. You have to sand it, tape it, redo it, so there's no going back. It's one or done. For this area, being that it's a very flat area, there's no body lines, there's no curvature to this area, I'm going to be using the hardest block. It's 3/16 1/4 inch thick. There's almost no flexibility to it. Another tool that you want a lot of light in this situation, so get yourself an LED light, flood the area with light, that way you can see everything. It helps you see the orange peel that you didn't get. Sometimes even when it's wet, you can kind of see a slight difference. So a light definitely helps you. And also snow boots, waterproof snow boots. A lot of water is used in this process, and there's nothing worse than going home with a set of very soaked, soggy feet. So get yourself a set of snow boots. Currently in New Jersey, it's 90 degrees out, but I'm wearing snow boots. I'll be a lot more comfortable at the end of the day when I get time to go home. So here we go. So you can see here, I've marked the edge. It's because there's clear buildup along the edge here. So there's a little bit of a low spot right in here, and this is all high right against here. So what I did was I went in and I marked it with my Sharpie. That way I can concentrate on getting this edge gone, but again, it's an edge, so it's risky. You don't want to break through. So I've marked the low spot so that I can go around my edges and sand them flat. All right, so like the left-hand side, the right-hand side also has a little bit of, let's call it a flow indicator. Clear, built up a little bit, kind of fell over and created a little bit of run. So what I'm gonna do here is I already covered it with my silver Sharpie, and then also that clear buildup that runs down the edge here, I also marked that. So I just wanted to show you in real time what it takes to just sand this flat so that it's gone and you won't see it in the final finish. So if you see, I just started sanding. You can kind of see in the silver Sharpie where the top of the run is starting to go away. So I'm sanding off the edge. However, I'm mentally thinking this edge just continues, so you're not, I'm not rolling over the edge, causing a chance of breaking through the edge. I'm also, when I'm sanding and the block is coming off the panel, I'm not putting any pressure on this side of the block. I'm letting the block just continue out, keeping the pressure on the block that's actually contacting the panel. Because again, you don't want to break through. If you're sanding and you start seeing green sludge come off your sandpaper, game over. And that's not fun. That'll ruin your day. I'd probably just end up going home and start another day tomorrow. Keeping it always wet. Now, a lot of people, I've even done it in the past where you put a little bit of dish soap. Oh yeah, I'm gonna, add some dish soap, get a little soap. However, that decreases the effectiveness of the sandpaper. So the water, you just want enough water there. You don't want too much water to where it's, creating, a lubricity to the sandpaper. You want to make the sandpaper as effective as possible. So in order to do that, you just want a little bit of enough water just to clear away any clear coat that's getting sanded off. There's more than one way to skin a cat. You can remove runs with a razor blade by shaving it down. However, I don't think that's as effective as this method. You know, like I said earlier, this is like our machining process, so we want to act as if your panel's in the vise of a Bridgeport, and your sanding block is just slowly running a mill across the surface to just bring the whole level down a little bit at a time and evenly. Consistency is key in every step of the world of custom painting and high-end painting. I don't claim to be a show car builder. I like to say we build very high-end driver quality cars. We strive for perfection. At the end of the day, this is hand done. So there's always any craftsman that works with their hands. There's going to be a level of human error. However, we're always keeping our eyes on the prize to do the best job we can. I love what I do. I'm probably 5 hours into this so far, and I love every minute of it. This is the most time-consuming step, the 600 grit, your initial cut. It's pretty cut and dry once we're done with 600. All I have to do is this lower portion of the quarter panel, then the panel but below the trunk lid. And then we'll be able to start getting into the guide coat process, guide coating the panels. And then we'll stick with a hard block with 1000 grit, because you can still introduce some waves if you were to go to a soft block with 1000 grit. So we're going to want to cut the 600 grit with a 1000 grit, keep it nice and flat, and then from there on out, 1500 grit is not really going to introduce any waves in the finish. So we'll go up to like a rigid foam block, like a Durablock. It's also a bigger block you can use. You know, they have a small rectangle block I'll show you, or they have your typical, standard size, postcard size block, a little bit smaller than a postcard. And then once we get done with 1500, we'll go to that standard soft block that's very soft. You can fold it. It's because we're just trying to get as much surface contact onto the panel to remove the 1500 grit scratches, and then remove the 2000 grit scratches with 2500, and then we go up to 3000. So now you can see, for the most part, our clear buildup along the edge is on its way out. My area where the run was is completely flat. Let me go get a paper towel, clean it off. So it's almost there. So you can see right here, there's a little shiny spot, and then the clear buildup, there's still a low spot in there, so we'll highlight that, and then back here as well. And then also up here on the top, we also have that little waterfall. I'll deal with that once we get completed with the run, since that's our main area of concern right now. It's very hard to get lost. We just do step by step, work down an area until it's completed, until what you think is 100%, and then move on. All right. Now this little clear edge, you know, we kind of got it on the peak of this edge, so the sanding isn't completely cutting it off because it is just rolled over a little bit. So I'll just very carefully with my finger just touch it off, because you can kind of see there's, you know, it's already starting to go away, that little tape edge. So we're just going to lightly hit it. Until you can't feel it. Just to get rid of that flat, clear tape edge. That's going to look so nice when the exterior is buffed out and it's 100% glossy, and then you open the door, you have that nice flat, clear. That's going to look killer. And there you go. And that is Run Be Gone. Every painter has them in one way or the other. But yeah, that's how I take care of runs, small runs. Big runs, sometimes you got to bring in the cavalry where you have to use a razor blade, or sometimes you can take some spot putty and spot putty the area and block it down. It's extremely time consuming. So my goal is to never run, but sometimes it happens. So let's finish this quarter panel, get the back of the car done, and then we're done with the first step. Okay, 600's done. Geez, I had about, let's say it was 4.5 hours today and 2 hours yesterday. So 6.5 hours to get the whole body done. You can see a couple areas I didn't do because it's just way too tedious. Back here, we'll eventually 1,000 grit it and 1,500 grit it. But the major cut is done. The most important step is done. So now what we're going to do is we're going to get our dry guide coat and guide coat the whole thing. Again, on a dark color, I like to use the white Mirka guide coat. I discovered this stuff probably 6 years ago, and it's a game changer, life changer. It makes it so much easier, especially on dark cars where it really matters. They've had black for a long time, but then I discovered the white. So it's a huge help when it comes to a dark car. Everybody says, oh, it's so hard to paint black. I mean, this is as dark as it gets, and quite frankly, we treat every color as if it's the same. The process is the same no matter what color it is. It's just that white, silver, yellow, bright colors are a little bit more forgiving, so you can kind of get away with some things. But we treat every color the same when it comes to the wet sand and buff. We want to make sure it's polished to a perfect 100% gloss level, whether it be black or white. So as you can see, I'm working it in. I'm not just doing a quick one. You want to work it in to the depth of every 600 grit scratch that you introduced when you did your initial cut with 600. So you're working it into the whole panel. All right, we got a quick gone over with 1,000 over the 600, and I'll show you what I'm talking about when I talk about rogue scratches. So if I didn't use the white guide coat, there's a good chance I would miss a lot of stuff. Looks good, looks sanded. I don't really see any crazy scratches, right? I hit the whole thing with 1,000. And you wet it down. You wet it down and you start looking closely. You can see it up here, up in this top corner, right here. So those are rogue 600 grit scratches. Kind of hard to get on the camera. Up here, there's some scratches. There's one down here. But in person, I can see this. So there's a white haziness to the panel that indicates to me that there's still some white guide coat there. So we're going to want to go ahead and continue to sand until that's gone. All right, now that the driver's side is completely finished, we're moving on. We're doing the passenger side. We'll get it done in 1,000 grit, then we'll move to 1,500 grit with a Durablock. A little bit softer of a block at this step. After this step, we're not going to need as hard of a block. So we'll keep going, losing my fingertips as we go. All right, 1,000 grit's completely finished. I'm gonna go around and do a little bit of pre-cleaning or post-cleaning, whatever you want to say. Pre-cleaning for 1,500, post-cleaning cleaning after 1,000. The guide coat, you want that out of the way. The guide coat is only there for the grit you're working on. You don't want to keep it around, because if you leave it and you pick it up, you know, the cleaner the better. So I'm gonna go around. This isn't just water. This is a water-based pre-paint cleaner. It's not a wax and grease remover. It's meant to remove water-soluble stuff. So being that we only introduced water and guide coat, we just need to use a water-soluble cleaner. It's pretty much like an alcohol type cleaner. So we're just gonna go around and we're gonna clean everything off. Keep it clean. Keep it clean. So we're gonna go in here. You can see there's a ton of drips and stuff, and if we were to leave that until all the way at the end, and you know, we're talking many hours. So if you leave this, it's a huge bear to remove down the road, and there's nothing worse than putting a car together, forgetting it, and then having dirty sludge drips on the inside of a car. You want it to look clean. You know, if somebody was to take apart the car, you know, you don't want, I don't know, it just, for me, you see, it looks like it's sloppy. So I can do whatever I can to clean it now to ensure a better product in the end. So keeping your work clean is you know, also about that just bleeds quality right there. If you're going to be clean during the process, the final product is going to be just as good, if not better than expected. So we're just going to go ahead, and before we guide coat, before 1,500 grit, I'm going to go ahead and wipe the whole car down, get all that sludge, all that out of there, so that we're just laying guide coat down, and the clear coat is free and clear of any contaminants that could then just get slid around during the 1,500 process. So we're now all guide coated, ready for the next step. 1,000 grit's done, it's in the past. We're gonna step up to 1,500 grit. Same old, water, sandpaper. However, this time, like I had mentioned, we're stepping up to a semi-rigid foam block. 1500 is done, and we're moving on to 2000. And for 2000, 2500, and 3000, we can use your good old soft block sanding box, flexible sanding block. We want this to contour to every body, line, curve, crown, all that stuff. We want to make sure that this 2000 grit is taking good care of this 1500 so that it can get closer to the point of making it super shiny. And with each step, each sandpaper you go up, the car actually does start to get a shine. And once we're done with 3000, the car will be shiny. There will be a level of gloss. And then compound, I'll go over what compound system we use. Compound doesn't have to work as hard by going up to 3000. It makes a huge mess, so the extra sanding steps helps you save time in the buffing process, and the buffing process can actually introduce some texture because you add a lot of heat to it. So the cooler you can keep your buffing process, the straighter it'll be, the better it'll be, the more polished it'll be. You'll just be polishing the paint, you won't be moving it around. So here we go. All right, guide coated once again. This is the last time we'll need to guide coat in between steps. We're at 2500. Again, we're using the soft sanding block, soft block. Now the key with 2500, being that it's such a fine grit sandpaper, it's going to wear out quick. So the rule of thumb is double the amount of sandpaper you used versus 2000 grit. So for instance, it takes me 3 sheets in 2000 grit to sand the whole body. So we're going to use 6. So we're going to change it twice as often so that we know we're getting an effective cut with the 2500 to remove the 2000 grit scratches. And we'll also be looking out for those any rogue scratches that might have been left behind with 1500. Hopefully not 1000 or 600. If we find a 600 grit scratch, we're going to have to go way back. So hopefully, you know, we dotted our I's, crossed our T's, heavily guide coated in between each step. I did find some rogue scratches in between here and there while I've been sanding. So let's hope we got them all out, and all I got to do is take a couple 1500 or 2000 grit scratches out that are just a little bit deep with this 2500. And then we'll go over with a 3000 grit pad. Once this is completed, then we'll be ready to start buffing. Off camera, I wiped it down with the water-based cleaner, and we're ready to do 3000 here. And another tip I wanted to mention was, I think I mentioned it earlier, you don't want to use too much water. If you use too much water, you can actually hydroplane the sandpaper. So you just want enough water that it's, you know, you can feel drag. You can kind of feel when sandpaper is not being effective. It kind of, you know, kind of like skim boards, you know, at the shore. When there's a skim board, you can feel it kind of hop up and hydroplane. It gets really easy. So then you know that your sandpaper is not being effective. So here we go. Start 3000. It's pretty quick. You don't have to spend too much time. This is just your final quick cut. It also removes any fine scratches. It removes any guide coat that may be left over and just gets you perfectly cleaned and prepped for compound and buffing. And that's when it'll really start to shine. You'll actually see quite a bit of gloss after we finish this 3000 grit round. And again, it's just, I do it by hand. Some people, you can do it with a machine. It's designed for a machine. I mean, it's a 6-inch DA pad, but I do it by hand just to be soft, not to be too aggressive. Because imagine you broke through at this stage after 10 hours of sanding. That would just require a whole new coat of clear coat, and you got to start over. There's so many variables. So take your time, hit it. Don't put too much elbow grease into it, just enough. And like I had just mentioned, you know, make sure you go around your edges so that when you buff up against an edge, it's nice and easy. And that concludes the sanding. You're looking at, that was 11 and a half hours. I'm sorry, 11 hours. So 11 hours just in sanding. So, you know, take whatever shop you use as labor and times that by it, and you can understand why a high-end paint job is very time-consuming and very expensive. If this is the level that you're looking for, it's going to take a high budget for paint and body to get it to this point. So, again, it's a labor of love. Love what I do. This was fun. I enjoyed every minute of it. I don't get too stressed about it. I don't get too nervous about it. It's just one of those things. If you do break through, it's just the way it is. You don't want to. That's the goal. So, with that being said, we are done with sanding. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go around and do a deep clean again with my waterborne cleaner to make sure that we're removing any sanding sludge. I can now remove this masking that was protecting the flat clear, because we'll want to redo that now. So remove that, get all the sanding sludge, because it's very important to not introduce any old sanding sludge into the buffing process, because you're just going to be taking a higher grit. It could probably be a small piece of the sandpaper that's hanging out, you know, in the sludge. You're going to drag that up and over the panel. Just going to cause haziness. It's going to cause more time. It's going to cause a less, you know, a lower quality of a finished product. So with that being said, I'm going to finish wiping this sumbitch down. Excuse my language. And we're going to go over the products I use to compound and polish and make it look super nice. We're ready to start polishing. And here is the system that I use. I've used many different systems throughout the years. However, I found that this one is really good. It's a 3D. It's a German company. This is their extra cut compound. It's the ACA 500 step 1. And this is their specific buffing pad, wool pad, to use with their compound. You don't want to use a just a regular old, you know, wool pad from your auto body store. You want to use their specific pad for their product. And then this is step 2, ACA 520. It's used with their spider cut pad, and we'll step up to this once all the compounding is done. So it's a low speed process. You don't want to use, you know, 2,000 RPM. You're not using an angle grinder. You're using a buffer. High speed just heats up your product, heats up the paint, and it doesn't really get you anywhere fast. So low and slow is the way to go. And stay tuned, and we'll start cutting on this thing and making it shiny. So here we go. I'm going to start down here, work my way over. Now, first things first. So you want to buff off a panel. So spins this way. So what you want to do is you want to make sure that the buffing wheel is spinning off the panel. If you were to buff it and your wheel's going into the panel, you're going to create a ton of heat, just going to burn through. So Again, very slow. This is set at 1,000 RPM, so low and slow. You don't need a lot of RPM. I use a Milwaukee cordless. It's a game changer for me. I haven't made the step over to the long throw DA buffers quite yet. I'm still an orbital guy, but maybe someday I'll make the leap. But for now, we use the orbital with this 3D system. Now, you don't need a lot. You just need 4 or 5 dots. That's all you need. So we'll put it down. It's somewhat wet. It's not soaking. I'm not slinging. I'm loading the buffing wheel. I'm not slinging compound all over the place. I'm just making sure that it's loaded up and I'm getting good contact. I'm keeping the wheel as flat as possible. You don't want to be doing like that, because what you'll do is you'll just start gouging the paint and you'll actually introduce some waves to it. So use the whole pad with just a slight pressure up, so that you're not, like a floor buffer, out of control. So here we go. Now I've gotten this area pretty well polished out and compound. However, like I had mentioned, there's still going to be a level of haziness. So what I'm going to do just for this area, whoa, there we go. I'm going to just, for this small area, I'm going to step up to the step 2 just to go over it. Do the area, see how it looks, see if I'm doing well, because if I don't want to get all the way through and then realize that I got to keep compounding. So I'll just do the step 2 again. You can go up 200 RPM with the step 2. Check your progress. Shimming it off. It's looking pretty good. Check down low. Make sure you've gotten all your scratches out down low. That can be missed pretty easily. Looks pretty good. Couple small scratches. That'll come out with the slight compounding. So we'll go back and we'll hit this area. But I think we're pretty good to move on. I'm pretty happy with this outcome. The paint is flat. Flat, shiny, and green. So one particularly tricky area on this car is going to be this body line. So I did end up sanding down in there just to cut some of the peel that's on this little 3/8 of an inch ledge. Didn't do it with 600 because it's too aggressive. So I ended up 1,500, 2,000, 2,500, 3,000. However, to get sanded in there, or I'm sorry, buffed, compounded in there really well, I don't want to risk breaking, burning the paint on this edge. So I'm just going to protect it with this fine line tape so that I'm not buffing on it, and I can sleep better at night knowing that I didn't burn through this. So just barely rolled over, because it is slightly polished from doing this side of the quarter panel. The fibers went over and kind of hit the outer edge. So we're going to use our normal buffing wheel. We're going to turn it way down. I'm going to extend it I'll put down this just to protect this way lower part so I know I'm not accidentally hitting it. So I'm going to turn the buffer all the way down to 800 RPM. And I'm just going to run the wheel right in there. I'm going to apply my compound to the outer edge so that this outer ribbon part of the buffing wheel gets saturated with compound. We can get that to work. So this is a time-consuming spot for sure. You definitely want the wheel to be running off of this body line because it's concave. It's going to take a lot of time to get that inner section completely compounded, scratch-free, nice and shiny. So I'm just applying it all the way out here, just a little bit, and turn it down all the way. And my battery's dead. Which brings me to my next point. Make sure you have multiple batteries. Otherwise, you're going to be waiting a while in between battery recharges. So we're just letting the outside of the wheel run in there. It's the shaggy part, so it's going to conform in there. And then we're not gonna, we don't want to be buffered. This is going to be a tricky spot on the end here. We don't want to start digging this edge. So I'll actually go in there and I'll tip the wheel like this and we'll run it off that edge. So we'll continue to compound this inner body line. Greatest thing I love about this buffer is that it has excellent RPM control. When you come off, it stays at the same RPM. You put pressure into it and it ramps up the torque. It has excellent RPM control. Because sometimes you'll get in an area where you come off the panel, the buffer starts to speed up, you put it back down on the panel and you can chance burning it up. And I'll just come in here. Yeah, so here's my problem. This is polished, but that absolute inside edge is not. So we might have to get old-fashioned and actually hand polish that almost 90-degree spot in the body line. We'll do that. We'll continue until it's nice and shiny. So there we have it. This is after step 2. I'd say it's 98% there. There's going to be some small scratches that come up, but yeah, that's like a final product. It's nice and flat, no orange peel. Looks good. The transition from gloss to flat is seamless now. Peel it back here. You see that sweet transition from flat to gloss. Now to buff the rest. And that is all she wrote. 17.5 hours later, this thing is buffed to near perfection. Nothing's ever perfect, but this is damn near close to perfection. That transition from gloss to flat is unreal. Well, that about wraps it up for this video. 17.5 hours. It's a ton of work. My hands were throbbing each night I went home, but the final product is worth every minute of it. I hope you were able to learn something. I hope you stayed for the whole video. I know this turned into quite a long video. However, I love spreading my knowledge anywhere I can help somebody else. That's how I learned, by knowledge being spread and challenging yourself and pushing yourself to do better. This is, I'm real happy with this one. This thing came out phenomenal. So now we get to put it all together. Again, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.